Our first speaker, Margot, is the recently appointed Birds on Farms Program Manager. She was previously project coordinator for the ACT YAS Birds on Farms project. We got 3 projects in New South Wales, in southern New South Wales, Central West, and in ACT YAS. We'll have a short time for questions after her talk, I hope. And if you post your questions in chat, and if there is time, I'll ask Margot to respond. Otherwise, we'll record those questions and send answers to you later on. We've just celebrated Migratory Birds Day with the theme this year of no insects, no birds. Perhaps an interesting link with Birds on the Farms project. Thank you, Margot. I'll let you know when your time to finish is close. Thank you.
All right.
Oh God, now I've got a message saying my internet connection is unstable.
Just when you need it, eh?
Yeah, thank you, Judy. I don't think, I think we've recorded 1 shorebird so far in the Birds on Farms program. We got a Latham snipe on one of the dams, so we were quite happy about that. But other than that, no, it's mostly the habitat that we're looking for. So I'll start sharing my screen. Just have to wait till there we go. I'm hoping everybody can see that. So we've got, like Judy said, we've got 3 projects, Birds on Farms projects within New South Wales. I'm going to give you a quick overview of Birds on Farms project in general, and then I'll actually run through the projects individually to let everybody know where we're going, how we're tracking with them, and what we've achieved so far, which I guess is sort of the more exciting news than the background story. The background story will be familiar for a lot of you. So the question was, why have we started the Birds on Farms project? So in 2020, BirdLife Australia developed the Temperate Woodland Bird Conservation Action Plan. In that, they had a look at how many birds were considered threatened, or woodland birds were considered threatened or in significant decline. Looking at that, they identified 51 taxa of woodland birds. Now, if we're thinking back to how many woodland birds there actually are in Australia, which is about 195, 51 taxa, so species and subspecies, means about a quarter of all woodland birds is now listed as either threatened or in decline. So it's a huge group of birds, and it's definitely something that we need to pay attention to, because even though 51 are listed as in significant decline, it doesn't mean that any of the other woodland birds are doing much better. They're just declining instead of in significant decline. But the action plan also looked at what the causes were for this decline. And the 2 major causes that they could identify were habitat loss and fragmentation. So as you all know, especially agriculture in the east coast of Australia is a major cause of habitat loss in the area. A lot of the habitat loss has occurred on the really fertile plains. And so what's left standing is quite often woodland areas in the more rocky habitats that weren't suitable for agriculture. So that's really led to the fragmentation of this habitat, that you just have these little islands in large green paddocks or crop fields. And then in New South Wales, 75% of the remaining woodland can now be found on private property. So we only have 25% that's currently in reserves and looked after. And that's really not enough to maintain the woodland bird population. So we really need to focus on working with private property landholders to conserve woodland habitat and hopefully actually help them improve and restore it. So the aims of the Birds on Farms program, the first aim is, of course, our biggest. We want to halt and reverse the decline of woodland bird populations. But for that, we have to focus our attention on a few other issues. So the program really wants to raise awareness of woodland birds. Most people don't know that woodland birds are actually in decline. A lot of people are familiar with them, which is a good thing. But yes, because they still see them regularly if they have a woodland plot, they just don't realize that how threatened they currently are. So we also wanted to have a look at the distribution and health of woodland bird populations on private property. So like I said, 75% of the remaining woodland is on private property, so it makes a huge impact. Just monitoring the 25% really doesn't tell the full story. And then we wanted to assess the success of revegetation projects in restoring woodland bird populations. So is bringing back the habitat, bringing back the birds. We always glibly say, plant it and they will come. But who knows? It might not be the case. And not every bird might return to what we've planted. And then the fourth aim is really what we are focusing on recently, is we want to inspire landholders to increase the extent and the condition of their woodland habitat on their property. So we really make a connection with them when we're monitoring birds on their property, for them to make that connection to the birds, to really feel sort of ownership over this group of bird species, and really want, I guess, inspire them to help them. So we've got some activities that we do. We do a lot of community engagement. So we work with a lot of volunteers, birdwatching volunteers and landholders. So we run a lot of bird identification training days. We do bird walks with people, but we also run a few workshops and webinars that are specifically targeted towards that habitat restoration and really explaining to people what you can do on your property to bring the birds back. Then we have a component which is the bird monitoring program, and that really is designed to assess the distribution of the woodland bird population on private properties. But then secondary, it's that step where we can really get the landholders excited about their woodland birds, because people will come, bird watchers will come and join them for the monitoring program. As we all know, we like to talk about our birds when we see them, and we all know these fantastic facts that nobody else knows. So the landholders really get the story about the woodland birds, and that really sort of grows their affinity with the birds that they have on their property. And that's sort of the point where we come in with our project and say, well, this is fantastic. We realize you love your woodland birds. Would you participate in our project and try to help them? So we offer the development of habitat restoration plans for their property, and really outline what they can do on their property to support the birds. And then if funding is available, we can actually do the on-ground implementation for the habitat restoration. So this is probably where a few of you might be interested in for the bird surveys. We do them either 2 or 4 times a year. So in the ACT, yes, we only do them twice. We have a lot of volunteers that are committed to a lot of other projects. So we sort of figured they were running out of time. The other projects we do 4 times a year in the seasons. We have about 2 to 4 survey sites on the property. It all depends on how large the property is and how much woodland habitat they still have left. We use the standard 2 hectare, 20-minute survey technique. And then the survey can be done either by a single observer or in pairs if people prefer pairs, or sometimes it's going to be in combination with the landholder. Which a lot of our landholders, turns out, are really excited about it and keep joining the volunteers, which also gives the landholder really that opportunity to learn and hopefully at some stage can take over the surveys themselves. And just a quick sort of overview of our habitat restoration plans. So we work with the local landholder. We don't step in and say, okay, this is what you need to do, but we really start the communication with them and the discussions about what they would like to achieve in their property. Because a lot of our landholders have operating farms. So they will have plans lined up, what they want to do, whether they want to install more watering points, whether they want to divide up their paddocks with additional fencing, stuff like that. So we need to make sure that we know what their plans are in the future to then line it up with what they could do in the areas for increasing the bird habitat. We do a few things. So one of the things is protecting remnant vegetation on the property. So fencing off, the remnant vegetation and taking all the stock out, which will also allow natural regeneration of the plant community. We encourage them to plant understory in those remnants because quite often the cattle have taken out all the shrubs, which is a really key sort of characteristic of the woodland habitat. But we also tell them where they could potentially plant, or whether they want to enhance the dam, or a lot of the people around my particular area invest in creekline restoration, because that stops both erosion as well as creating habitat for species. So we designed those separate projects. We detail what the work that is required for them, how many trees are required for them, and we can create a budget for each and every project. And this is all a service that we provide free of charge. And then once the plan is completed, they can either apply for funding themselves if they have the ability, so potentially from local land care organizations or Greening Australia, or as an organization as BirdLife, we have access to a few more larger funding opportunities, and then we can potentially apply for a large grant and hopefully implement several of the habitat restoration plans at the same time. So that's sort of the backstory of it. Like I said, we have 3 projects that are in New South Wales. So it was mentioned southern New South Wales around the Albury area. We have central New South Wales around Cowra, and I'm based in the ACT Yes project. So southern New South Wales is one of our older projects. It's centered around, well, not centered around, I guess. It's if you follow the line between Corowa, Albury, Jingellic along the river, and then you go up to Henty, that's approximately the area they're working in. The project started in 2019, which started off originally as a monitoring project, just to see how many people were interested in one of these projects and to really get that interest from landholders going. And by now they are surveying 68 properties. So that's quite a few properties if you think that all of them have, again, 2 to 4, survey sites. They're running about 180 survey sites that they survey 4 times a year. Now, the fantastic thing about this particular project is that they have received funding from both Saving Our Species and the Environmental Trust. Both of them are from the New South Wales government. But they've received that funding to specifically restore 100 hectares of woodland habitat. So far, Ben and his team have managed to restore or protect and improve 95 hectares of woodland habitat. So that's a huge extent. They're working with multiple landholders on this. And all of the landholders that are participating in this and are getting that money to improve their habitat, they all sign a 10-year voluntary stewardship agreement. So that means that we haven't just created 95 hectares of woodland habitat, but it's also being protected for the next 10 years as a guarantee, which is really important. Because, yeah, you can create woodland habitat, but if people neglect it and they don't take care of the little plantings, potentially you've just wasted a lot of money. So having that guarantee from the landholder that he's going to look after it for the next 10 years is really important. Also, by then, the trees at 10 years are usually tall enough to really just take care of themselves. And then we've got central New South West, or central West New South Wales, sorry. Too many letters. That project is run by Jaden Gunn. He's based in Cowra himself, but the project extends around Forbes Orange Park, so it sort of overlaps with the Cowra Woodland Bird Project area. The project started in 2019. Jaden came in a few years later, who took over. With him, he has 24 properties which are currently being surveyed. And his project was really established because we've received funding from the Environmental Trust. So again, the New South Wales government specifically to re-age the woodlands around the Cowra area. So if you're thinking about remnant woodlands and pristine woodlands, we're thinking about woodlands that have really old trees. There's a good understory level and a mid-story level. There's lots of leaf litter on the ground. There's lots of coarse woody debris scattered around. Because the trees are quite old, there's lots of hollows available. And integral to that is also there's usually not that many noisy miners, because noisy miners don't like that particular habitat. Noisy miners like what we've created in the agricultural area. So those open paddocks with just a few scattered trees with really good line of sight. That's really what noisy miners like. And unfortunately, noisy miners are the bullies of the bird world. And they are actually listed as a threatening process for woodland species. And they've excluded lots and lots of the smaller woodland birds. So they basically bully any bird that is smaller than them. So for his project, he has restored 73 hectares of woodland with understory plantings. So they've basically gone in, the woodlands were already there, but they've really increased it with lots of understory plantings, and they fenced those areas off. He's also reintroduced 80 pieces of coarse woody debris across those properties. He's installed 200 nest boxes, and those are specifically designed for brown tree creepers as well as turquoise parrots, which are two of the main species he's focusing on in his area. We haven't had, the nest boxes went up last year. There hasn't been a successful breeding of a brown tree creeper yet, but the white-throated tree creepers at least have taken onto the nest boxes. So it seems to be working for tree creepers, which is already a big success. And he's done 2 projects where he's actually called the noisy miners in 15 properties. And that's really to see if we call them noisy miners, are we bringing the small birds back? So he's done surveys a month after the call, 3 months after the call, and 6 months after the call to see how effective these calls are. And we're just collating the data now, and hopefully we'll get some results out of that. And with that, he's also signed the 12 voluntary stewardship agreements for 10 years. So again, protected 73 hectares of woodland habitat for 10 years coming. And then we've got the ACT Yes project. It's these are, I guess, smaller towns than I've just mentioned. It runs from Borough and Crookwell in the north, and then it goes down in a triangle towards Canberra. We started in late 2022. So for us, you know, there wasn't a project like this before. So the first year was spent just trying to get property or landholders to participate in the monitoring. We now have 37 properties that are being surveyed, and I think we've got 100 survey sites with that. And then in the last couple of months, we've really started advertising the habitat restoration plans. Unfortunately, we haven't received any, government money yet to actually implement this. So we've been asking around with people. So we found 5 landholders have participated so far with the habitat restoration plans. Those plans cover 45 hectares. We've been incredibly lucky that one of the plans has been taken on by Greening Australia. So they are now restoring 28 hectares, or pretty much the entire hillside that somebody's given up of their property. And we've got 2 landholders that have started implementing the plans themselves. And so they've got 8.5 hectares that they're currently working on restoring as well. So it's amazing to see that even if we haven't got that funding available, the landholders are really willing to do the work. A lot of landholders just have that idea that they want to leave the land better than they've got it at the moment. And they really want to, put trees back into that landscape, because it's not just for the birds, but it's also just increases productivity, and it just restores the whole ecosystem of the land. So I don't know if you've been keeping track. I have recently. So we've got 200 odd hectares that have currently been restored by our project, which is fantastic news. If just to give you an idea about how big that actually is, 200 hectares is about 71 footy fields that have been restored with trees. So yes, we're immensely proud of the project, and there have been so many people that have been engaging with it. We've gone into classrooms, and the kids have picked up on what habitat restoration is. Jaden always say there's 3 things that you teach them to yell out at you, and it's what's happening, why are birds declining, and it's habitat loss. And then when you ask them what can we do, we plant trees. And how do you go about that? We work with BirdLife. So kids are really quite excited about it all. And yeah, we've got lots of people. So one of the pictures up the top is one of our workshops that we held. The one on the left at the bottom is one of our training days where we went out to a local TSR and tried to identify the hornbills we just learned about. And then the bottom right is one of our land care groups that we were doing a workshop on habitat restoration and how they can participate. So the attention and I guess the enthusiasm of people is really catching. And it's amazing to see how many people are, want to participate in the project. We've got landholders on the waiting list at the moment because we can't accommodate them with enough volunteer bird watchers, which is fantastic, and it's a good problem to have. But it's we're definitely trying to solve that at the moment. So that's sort of where the New South Wales projects are standing. We also, I guess I should mention, for people that have friends and family in other parts of Australia, we have a full monitoring program across the whole of Victoria as well, and we have another habitat restoration project like this in Yarra TA, so that's just north of Melbourne. And then we've started another monitoring project, or restarted the monitoring project in WA as well. So around Perth, there's a monitoring project, and hopefully they're planning on moving into the habitat restoration space as well. So yeah, it's really fantastic to see how this is growing. And I guess that brings me to an end.
Just about time, Margot. Thank you.
Good. Just one last remark. If you're interested in the project or just want to contact us with any questions, you can email us on birdsonfarms@birdlife.org.au.
Thank you,
I'm glad I
Margot.
stayed within 15 minutes.
Well done. Thank you, Margot. There aren't any questions listed on chat. If anybody wants to post something afterwards, we'll pass it on. Margot, have you had any connection by any chance with the Hotspots program?
No, we haven't.
Okay,
No.
I'll get in touch with you about that. It's different groups looking at land fire management with a view to conserving things, not just burning everything. I'll speak to you about that another time. Okay, thank you so much, Margot.